All right. Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Gratitude Speaks. I am Uncle Marty Marr here with a very special guest today, Tom Bond with Summit. And here on Gratitude Speaks, we care and we share with others about our experience with communal living and using gratitude as a tool for happiness. And today's interview is definitely exciting for me as someone who works with Summit and really believes in this leadership team, believes in Tom, and our mission to help people for the right reasons. So today's episode, we're gonna see how long we can keep this, within reason, because Tom is a special character. He's somebody who has a long history with recovery and with building structures that help other people. So with that, I'm going to throw it over to Tom. And Tom, I'm hoping that you can just kind of take us back through some of your history and how you got to where you are now with Summit.
Yeah. Thanks for setting this up and doing this. And as we've talked about prior to the hitting record, it's not my comfort zone. But I do believe that it's important to share. So I'll be 60 this year, right, in August, and a little background here. So I started, I remember when my best friend knocked on my door. I guess I was 15 or 16 years old, and he said, "Hey, I got to show you something." And we went down to the woods and smoked a joint, um, and that's where it all kind of got started. And then went to college, and then at college, it just was amplified. There was more opportunity, and um, both without parents being around, and just different drugs and opportunities. So it just I call that kind of my training ground. But then after college, I didn't finish school. I left. My college sweetheart had graduated and moved back to Baltimore, and so I was kind of antsy to move back with her, and I never knew what I was doing at school other than partying. So I just I never went for a specific reason and never really developed one, and got involved in the fraternity lifestyle, and just I had a lot of fun there, but I didn't, and I learned a lot. Learned a lot about life, and learned a lot, but didn't walk away with a degree. um but anyway, yeah, and so then I did, like, about 10 or 12 years in kind of Fortune 500 corporate America. And so from outward looking in, like, I seemed to have a pretty enviable life. I had a company car, an expense account that was ridiculous, and I did a lot of traveling. um and um but I was miserable, right? I just I was miserable. I hated it. I hated the idea of, is this what life is about? Like, I spend, the majority of my life meeting other people that I don't know, and taking them to dinner, and taking them to play golf, and doing this and doing that, and trying to, like, it was like playing a part, right? As opposed to being myself. And there were moments in certain times where you could be yourself, but it just felt like, is this what life is about? Am I going to do this for the rest of my life just so I can earn a paycheck or whatever? So anyway, and I just, I had a hard time putting that college lifestyle behind me. It's typically people go to college, and then they got to get it burned out of the system, and they move on, get a job, and then they start to, slow down, build a family, that type of thing. Um, and I think
Were
for
you
me,
doing Were you doing sales?
yeah, I was.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of times when you're the sales guy and you've got to people up and you're taking them to dinner, it's hard not to do
Right,
that with alcohol.
right. And
Yeah.
we're talking late 80s, into the 90s, and it was, and in the industry I was in, which was international shipping, it was just par for the course, right? I mean, we literally, at our sales meetings, I didn't, because I used my expense account, but there were guys who were like married with families, and they would get, chided for
Mm,
not going out enough, for not, we were
yeah.
supposed to take someone to lunch every day, if possible, and go to dinner once a week, and then, like I said, golf and functions and ball games, and it's just, it was constant. And, and like I said, some people say, well, that sounds like it's a pretty cool life, but you're also doing it with people you don't really know, right? It's not like you're taking your friends golfing, you're taking your friends at a ball game, or taking your friends at dinner. You're going with somebody that you might not like,
Yeah.
quite frankly. And sometimes I didn't like them, a lot of times
Yeah.
but
I can imagine too, it is very hard for some people to understand how someone who's successful and has money can not manage their addiction, right?
right,
And I still remember when I got into rehab, there was a woman who was a multimillionaire, and some of her biggest complaints, in group were about like playing tennis. And I'm like, if I just had more money, of course I would be fine. Like, like my
right,
addiction wouldn't be unmanageable. Um, yeah, so I
right.
think that's good that you mentioned that you bring that in, that the misery, the self-deprecation, the rest of the feelings still come in, whether there's more money to get more or not.
Yep. Addiction doesn't care, doesn't care about the color of your skin, or the amount of money in your bank account. I know people who are uber wealthy who struggle just as much. And it's funny, to hear some of the stories with some people I know that are, exceedingly successful and wealthy, and then you talk about, they tell their story, and you're like, huh. But there's a lot of power in that too, and I think we'll talk about that some more within the context of this discussion of, um, community, and being part of a healing community. It doesn't matter where you're from. Um, so yeah, so the long and short of it is, I continued to use, and, weekends, it's the old weekends became Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And and then my so I got married and in 89, at the age of 25, and divorced at the age of 27, or at least separated, right? My wife had an affair. And, look, it was, looking back in retrospect, it was, I was having my own affair, not with her,
Mm,
but with, I was continuing to seek. She wanted to do that thing we talked about. Hey, let's slow down. We met in college, and we had a party lifestyle, but now it's time to move on. We bought a big house, and but I was still going down and visiting some of my bachelor friends in Northern Virginia, and, tearing it up. And anyway, so now I find myself at 27 with, living in Canton, living in Tendeco Wharf, and um, kind of, yeah. Now I'm like, in some ways, if I'm being honest, in some ways I'm like, this is where I probably should have been and wanted to be. Um, and at least that's what I told myself, right? And so that just gave opportunity to amplify that lifestyle, which ultimately ended in just destitution, right? So I got fired, and, I kind of pulled myself up by my bootstraps. There wasn't really, I don't even know if there was really much in the world of recovery or treatment programs back there. I guess there were some, but it wasn't something that was very front forward like it is in today's world, right? But it was more about, okay, I just got to get my act together and go get another job. And that's what I did. and I would maintain for a little while again, and then I would slide back into the old habits, and then it would catch up to me, and I get I get fired again, and I did that thing probably 4 different times. I remember once my dad saying to me, he said, every time you crash and burn, you somehow come back up on top even better than you were when you crashed and burned. Like, how do you do that? And I think it's, a lot of us who are practiced at the art, so to speak, we're good at telling people what they want to hear. So interviews aren't all that difficult. You can get in front of somebody and kind of get a sense for who they are, and what you think they want to hear. And so I was, it's funny because most of the jobs I had in those early days, you were required to have a college degree, and I didn't have one. And I never lied. I never said I had one. I put on my resume that I went to JMU from
You
this
went
year.
to college.
Yeah, I went to college. I was there from this year to that year, and I studied this, but I never said, that I got a degree, and people just assumed that I did. So, um, yeah, it's funny. I remember one time in one job, it coming out in conversation with another one of the sales reps, and he said, you can't work here if you don't have a degree. I said, well, I'm working here. I appreciate it if you didn't say anything. But anyway, so it just, it got progressively and chronically worse and worse. Um, and then, the last kind of corporate job I lost. And then I said, I'm just gonna go tend some bar for a little while. And, again, like I would tell my friends, oh, I'm just taking a little break from life or whatever. And I don't know if I knew what was happening, right? Because of course I was, continuing to lie to myself in any way I could. But here I am, kind of living in a, couch surfing at this point, and working at bars down in Canton and Fells Point, and having fun, but not going really forward, right? And whatever money I made that night got spent that night, and yeah, and so it just got worse and worse. And then I started, to steal from the register if I had a bad day or whatever. And, so even bartending jobs became hard to hold down. Um,
I
remind,
worked at the Brass Monkey for a little while down in downtown Baltimore.
yeah, yeah. I worked in Canton, the Canton Square, before Canton Square, just as Canton Square was starting to become big, as the bars were starting to open up around there, and the housing prices around there went skyrocketing. Um, and Yeah, and so, remind me, Marty, one day I'll tell you the story about the yacht club. It's too much to get into now, but suffice to say there were police involved, and um, I was terminated, and that was the last job that I had for a while. And I was living kind of on in a better part of town, and I would go into the projects to score. Um, and and I remember one day I started to become fairly friendly with the family that would run for me. The old, I would sit in the house, and one of the folks would go out and get what I was looking for and bring it back, and you pay a cost for that. But they were like, why don't you just move in here? You can sleep on this couch. And they were just looking for somebody who had a semi-steady income, which I did at that time before losing that last job. So I was actually living in kind of an abandoned drug runner house, and I would walk to work and come back, um, and so basically, I was homeless. I didn't even realize it at the time, but thinking back, I was essentially, I had been homeless for a couple of years at this point, just bouncing around. And then ultimately moved into a. I was living in this house, this abandoned house with somebody. She owned the house, but there was no power. It was basically a bando, but it was owned at least, so there was no fear of the being thrown out of it. But I was paying her $10 a day just so I could sleep on a mattress in one of the Jack and Jill rooms. And then I started to think about it. I'm like, I'm paying $300 a month to live in an abandoned house. Like, and there's all these abandoned houses all around me. So I just moved next door to a totally, to a bando, and actually, took some pride in fixing up one of the rooms in the upstairs, and kind of rat proofing it. And so my hustle on the street was, car wash, right? Because I was living at kind of the corner of Milton and Eager, by what was the old incense factory, and so not too far from downtown John Hopkins campus. But it was a very dicey neighborhood, Monument Street, that area. And
How
so
are you getting the water for the car wash?
So yeah, it's a good question. So I had pieced together 2 or 3 different hoses, and had this hose piece that was probably 100 yards long. And I would go back into the cut, and snake around, and either find another abandoned house where they hadn't turned the water off, which a lot of times you could find, or just attach it to a spigot until somebody noticed that I was on their spigot, and I would say, "Oh, sorry, I didn't know that was my stuff. That was my spigot." Here, meanwhile, it's 100 yards away from where I am. But
So you had different locations.
yeah. Well, same kind of location, right on Milton Avenue, and and I took, for what it's worth, I kind of took pride in the work I did, and before I knew it, I had a little business. People got to know that I was there because I needed to be there. Like, so I would drag my cones out in the morning. I had these two cones and a little sign that I had spray painted. It said "Car Wash, please stop." And up the street at the top of Milton Avenue was a real car wash that was apparently busy all the time, and I think people would go by there busy, and then they'd see me and they'd just pull over and give me a shot, and I would do a good job. And so I was getting repeat customers. Then we had a few of us, especially on a weekend, there'd be 2 or 3 of us out there knocking down cars, and we were all caught up in the same mess. And that's something about living in that kind of homeless community. It is a community,
Yeah.
different community, right? But it's community is all about feeling valued and feeling a part of something bigger than yourself, right? And I was at a place in my life where they didn't care where I was from. They didn't care that I was from Hartford County, or that I'd gone to college, or any of that. It was all about day to day, really, living through each day, one day at a time.
Yeah.
Just making it through the day, and
Literally from a Fortune 500 company down to a corner car wash.
right, an alley car wash. And then I started getting arrested, just getting caught coming out of dope holes, and getting caught in the abandoned house one morning. The cops came in and raided us. It was me and another guy living in there. And funny story, George is doing really well now, and is a certified peer, and works to help other people try to come to the other side.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so he and I were living in there, and got rousted one morning and taken in, and then released later. And then they came in and busted us up again. And the last time, I didn't get out because I had some old warrants that they found. And So kind of long story short, the summer of '02, I ended up at the old Maryland Penitentiary, which was referred to as Steel Side, and very reminiscent of like Shawshank Redemption, if
Mm.
you've ever seen it. I mean, it's that it's that old prison that used to, I think it's torn down now. They used to sit right off of President Street there, what looks like an old medieval castle or something. And it's just the standard old stacks, of steel cages, and you were locked in the cage for 23 hours a day with another guy. You got out for an hour to stretch your legs and go to the yard if you wanted to take a shower or whatever, but you ate in there, you shit in there, you peed, and you did everything in there in this little, what was it, 8 by 8, maybe, you know maybe, it's two bunks and a
Mm.
toilet and a sink, and you know um yeah. And so I just remember, like, that was my bottom, right? And because I'd been locked up before, but you'd always go somewhere else, whether it was JI or Annex or something. It was not enjoyable, but it wasn't to that level. I was like, how did I end up locked up with murderers? Like, um, so it really, it gave me a couple of months to really think about, I think it's time to do something different and make a change, because I'm not built for this lifestyle. And so what had happened is, my cellmate got shipped out or whatever, and I got a new cellmate like 2 days before I got kicked loose, who asked me, well, what are you going to do when you get out? And I said, I don't know, I want to go back to the abandoned house, I guess. I don't have any plans. And he told me about the Helping Up mission, and showed me some, a flyer or something, and said, well, this is where I'm trying to go. I'm trying to, get my act together. And so it stuck with me. And um, and he gave me some clothes. I remember, because I came in with nothing. I came in, I think I was wearing, like a pair of shorts and not even a t-shirt or something when I got arrested. And he gave me a tracksuit or whatever, and said, here, take this, and, take care of yourself. Um, and so I did, I said to myself, yeah, that's what I'll do. I'll go to Helping Up mission, and try to get my life together. But I didn't. I got out. I went.
I wasn't expecting that.
I went right back to the house, and I spent about 3 days, and then the third night was just a really bad night of, shooting speedballs, and in the dark, and hearing the rats coming out. Literally, coming, because when it was dark, it was the rat's house. And throwing nails and stuff it was just a really crazy night. And so the next morning, a guy was supposed to come by and pick me up, and we were going to go boost or something, which I was terrible at. And he didn't show. And I said, well, I got nothing else to do. Maybe I'll go down and check this out and see what it's about. And so I gathered all my belongings, which is really all fit to be burned anyway, and threw it in a bag, and walked from Milton Avenue down to Helping Up mission. And as I'm walking down the sidewalk, I didn't shower. I was, 160 pounds soaking wet. Had hepatitis C. Um, I was a mess. Um, and so the guys seeing me coming down the street knew exactly who I was.
Mm.
Standing out in the corner smoking cigarettes, and I probably would have turned around and walked away, just because, walking across the threshold is sometimes the hardest part of that first, taking that first step, because I didn't even really understand what that meant at that time, but I do now. But they saw me, and they came up to me and they said, "Hey man, you looking for the help on that mission?" And I said, "Yeah, I think so." Like, yeah, I think so. They said, "Here, we'll show you where you're supposed to go." And so they escorted me around the back, and in the in the way it was back then, because back then it was still largely a shelter. um, you know, no air conditioning. Like one area had air conditioning. No elevators. I mean, it was still very kind of rough and tumble place, but nicer than the place I was coming from, right? And so
Yeah. And
it's
those
real,
Baltimore rats will chew on you too.
yeah. And I've had that happen. So yeah, it's really kind of a matter of perspective, right? So I instantly felt a sense of community. I instantly was laying on a mattress, which I didn't have. I was sleeping in a bed of sorts, a bunk bed, but it was a bed. I was able to take showers, and I was being fed, and I was becoming part of something, right? And I was enjoying myself. Um, I was really feeling like, for the first time, like, um, I was becoming part of something, and I think that's something that I had been craving for forever.
Well, what
Um,
you described right there too is gratitude,
right,
right? Your ability to realize that you were grateful for just having a mattress. You're grateful for having some people around you that weren't immediately trying to take advantage of you. You were grateful for what you did have.
right, 100%. Right. It's like we used to say this at the mission, and uh, as the mission grew and morphed into this beautiful place that it is now, like, guys who would come in and complain, I'd be like, "Guys, like, you have no idea what this place used to be like. Like, literally pigeons flying around in the chapel, and, like, I mean, it was an old rundown shelter." Um, but yet within that context, there was a lot of really good stuff happening, because it was the people that could see to that gratitude, right, that would stay, because other people would just leave immediately. So there was a good network of people there who generally came from, either coming out of prison or just coming off the streets or whatever. um,
And did
and
you tell us what year that was? What year was that?
I was 2002.
2002.
So it was October of 2002, because that's why the guy gave me the tracksuit. So I got locked up in the summer and released in October. And
Mm.
as he saw me getting released, he's like, "That you're wearing that? It's like it's a little chilly out now." Because I never even went out. I just really, like, I didn't want to see, like, sky and daylight stuff. I mean, I knew I was only in for a short time, and I was just like, I just kind of stayed in my bunk, even on the 1 hour, I would take a shower and then just lay back down. I just read a lot of books. But anyway, yeah. So 2002, and
So there's a lot of people that do just go in to different programs to get a rest. Is sometimes how we refer to it, right? And then go back out. What do you think it was that kept you in? Like what happened so that it was different for you?
yeah, no, that's a good question, and I'll say that, especially for the first month or so, when it was still pretty nice out. I remember we had a really cool Indian summer that year, so we got some really warm weather. And there's this thing about the hood, or whatever you want to call it, that it has a life of its own. And so some of it, or a lot of it, obviously, is the substances that we use, but a lot of it's also the lifestyle. You're like, you start wondering, "Oh, I wonder what's going on. I wonder what this person's doing, that person." You're just wondering what's happening in that little neighborhood. And I was also, there was part of me that still wanted to use, and there was a part of me that was feeling good, not, using and becoming, have my body detoxifying and cleaning itself out, and that takes a little time. So it was, I think, to answer your question, it was the pull to go back out wasn't strong enough. I was to overcome kind of the gratitude for what I was getting. And a piece of that was, there was a school on site. They had the one thing they did have that somebody had donated was a pretty significant computer lab so that guys could like study for the GED and things like that. Um, and they found out, pretty quickly that I had gone to college, even though I didn't have the degree. So my assignment, we all had assignments, whether you worked in the kitchen or whether you worked in the laundry or you worked in housekeeping, or everybody had a job because there were no staff. There really were no staff. There was like three people that worked there. There was the executive director Bob, and then there was a couple other people, and some volunteers and stuff. But it was really run by the guys that were there. um, but that was the power in it, though, right? So we had to become co-invested in the community that we were building, and we policed it, and was just because it just was, that's the way it was. There was no money, and so we just kind of had our own system. And I'm not saying it's perfect because it certainly wasn't. um, and there was still some differences when the staff did go home and there was nobody there, at night and on the weekends, where there was a shift in the culture that a lot of us didn't like. And ultimately that changed as we did grow. And but yeah, so I here I am working, helping guys study for GED, and so I'm feeling valued, right? And that's, at the I think at the core of humanity, that's we all want to feel valued, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I was able to impart, what wisdom and knowledge I had to help other guys, who couldn't read, or who had, left high school and were trying to, go back and get their GED or whatever. Um, and just, yeah, and then just for the first time since I was a kid, right? Like, and you go back, like, and this isn't true for everybody because I know some people don't have good upbringings, but I had a pretty good upbringing, right? And you go back to the days before drugs or alcohol enter your stream of consciousness, like you didn't even know what any of that was, when you're 10, 12, when you're playing baseball or whatever, and you're like how all of a sudden you get to a place in your life where you need to do drugs or alcohol in order to feel a certain way. Um, but so here I am for the first time in a long, long time, right? So I'm, 37 or whatever. And so since probably the age of 18, where, social anxieties took over and I started to use a lot to kind of compensate for that. This is the first time I'm not doing that, and nobody around me is either. And I was feeling really, really good about it. And so I did that for a year, and that was how long the program was, and it was a spiritually based program. And upon finishing the program, um, the pastor came to me and said, because I ended up the second half of my last 6 months there, I was working kind of as his assistant. He was the one of the only staff members, and so he did classes all day, and he was a really, really awesome person. And so I ended up like doing a lot of stuff for him because he saw my capabilities, and that was very cool, right? Like he could have just said, just sit over there and do what I say, but he really empowered me to do a whole bunch of stuff. One of which was one of the coolest things that's happened to me in this whole journey. About 6 months into my time at the mission, one of the things I did was read the letters from guys writing to us in jail who were trying to come there. So one day, I'm reading the letters, and if I saw one that looked right or whatever, because Pastor Gary didn't, he kind of leaned on me to decide which ones were probably guys that were just trying to get out of jail and didn't really care about trying to put their lives back together versus maybe ones that were. So anyway, I'm looking at the jail mail one day, and it's Lawrence. It's Lawrence, the guy that gave me the tracksuit.
Hmm.
And he had finished out his bit or whatever, and he was writing to the mission.
The guy who had told you about it in the first place. Cool. Okay.
The guy that had told me about it in the first place, his name was Lawrence. And I remembered him and remembered his name. He didn't, of course, he didn't know I was at the mission, so he was just writing to the mission in general.
Yeah.
And I happened to be the guy that read the mail. And I remember just like getting like super excited and ran over to Pastor Gary and said, "You're not going to believe this. This is the guy that told me about this place. That the only reason I ended up here. And now he's ready to come." So he came. So we wrote to the judge and said, "Yeah, we would love to have him here." Blah blah blah. We had this kind of letter that we would write, and he came, and he completed the program. So I don't know where he is today, but that was cool. Yeah, that was a cool full circle type of a thing that happened. It was very, very neat. So yeah. So then right after I celebrated 2 years, I relapsed. And I remember the day very, very, very vividly. It was a spring day. I'm very affected by weather and music and things like that, and so it was just one of these days that happened where I just I had been staying very busy helping other people and stopped staying busy helping myself. And so when that moment, that first thought that we're not, we can't help that first thought, we can help what happens after that. But I got that thought and I just went, right? And I remember getting in the cab and saying, take me to Montford and Ashland. And the cab driver turned back, like this. The guy that came from there, 2 years ago, and he turned around and he said, "Are you sure you got the address right?" And I said, "Yep." He said, "Okay." I said, "Yep, just drop me off and go about 3 or 4 blocks down and then turn around and come back and pick me up." And, as soon as I got out of the cab, I saw the people, who I hadn't seen in a couple of years. Some of them went scattering. The ones that didn't know me really well because they thought I was a police officer, somebody undercover or something. And I guess you'd hope that they'd say, "Get back in the cab, don't get out." Yeah. But that's not what they said. They were like, what can we get you, and what do we get in it, and what do we get for it? And look, I get it. I have no hard feelings about that. I understand the lifestyle.
No, that was me. That was me, Tom. I loved it when people would relapse. I didn't even know what recovery was about, but I knew if I could get them over to the backyard that they had money because they've been away for a while.
Right.
I would have welcomed you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Because I didn't spend my money on anything, really. I mean, every once in a while I'd go get a burger or something, but I had some money stashed.
I think it's worth saying too that like that right around an anniversary, like the few weeks before and the few weeks after, is very common. For whatever reason, people just get squirrely. It's time for it to come back after us.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And so I came back. I got what I went for, and spent a couple $100 as I knew I was going to spend $10 and then just turn around and come back, right? So I just I spent a couple $100 and came back, And in my
So you
mind,
had become more responsible.
yeah, in my mind, it was, I'm just going to get it out of my system. It's an itch I'm going to scratch, and then I'll put it aside, right? All of us have said that probably to ourselves at one
Hmm.
point, right?
Hmm.
And so, finished that batch and then said, well, one day, second day, might as well just, really get it out of my, the whole rationalize. You can rationalize anything if you want to as an addict. Um, and 2 days turned into three, and three turned into four, and four turns into a habit. And then, day five, I'm not feeling so good. So now I don't really have a choice. Um, and I'm taking the mission vehicle. I don't know if I should say this out loud. I think, yeah, I think it's okay. They know the story. Taking the mission vehicle up into the projects to do my business. And every hold on one second.
So I'll take a moment while Tom is on pause and just say we are brought to you by the Gratitude Foundation. And if you have a moment to check us out on gratitudefoundation.com, we would love your support or just for you to see what we're doing. Um, we're a nonprofit housing organization at Gratitude Foundation that provides safe, structured housing for addicts. Obviously, if you didn't hear already, I am a former addict myself. Me and the co-founder started Gratitude Foundation about 4 years ago, and since then we've managed to spread out into three different counties. We're in Allegheny County in Cumberland. We are in Washington County in Hagerstown, and we are in Baltimore County in Catonsville. And if you know of anyone who is in need of housing, we do usually keep a waiting list, but you can find us again at gratitudefoundation.com. And even if you can only, provide a little support of a dollar or $5 a month, we would certainly love to have you come and see what we do. We provide a lot of fun activities for our guys, and a lot of times those extra donations can allow us to have another trip. So with that, I'll take it back over to Tom, and we'll pick up from there.
Sorry, my dog. Um, yeah. So ultimately, I couldn't put it away. Um, and ultimately, they found out, and they let me go, and that was that was painful,
Mm.
right? Because I really did love what I did and love the place and everything about it, and but they did the right thing at the time, and I ended up at the Salvation Army and finished their program and did well while I was over there. And when I finished the program there, they hired me. Um, and so I was like, well, I'm not really where I want to be, but at least I'm back on my feet, so to speak. Um, and then the mission reached out, and we had lunch, and they said, if you're if you think you're ready, we'd like to have you come back, because I guess I had done enough in the first 2 years to get things moving in a certain direction, and I said absolutely, I'll be there tomorrow. I'll put 2 weeks notice in. I'm ready to go, and came back, and so that was '05,
Which
and
Salvation Army did you work at?
um, I was at the one on Patapsco Avenue.
Okay.
I worked there for a while, and then I actually started to manage one of the stores, the one that was on Eastern Avenue. It's no
Okay.
longer right across from East Point Mall. Store number 5. So yeah, so I come back to the mission in '05 and spent um, the next 14 years there. 14 years. Um, and we built, we built a monster there, right? I mean, it's, now it's 750 program participants, including 250, women and children now, and 500 men. And, there's a myriad of different programs there that we set up over the years, veteran programs, and some programs based on spiritual abstinence, spiritual programs based on abstinence, and some programs based on medication assisted treatment, and next step programs for like ED diversion, like all kinds of stuff. Just it was a really interesting time. Just talking through, like, what are the needs, what are the gaps, and how do we create the best possible opportunity for guys to try to put their lives back together. Um, and so it was great. Loved it. Love the organization, and love being there. And then I see, like, one of your questions here is, what inspired you to start Summit? And it was really, I would typically work fairly late, just because I enjoyed being there, and I didn't have family. I mean, my wife, but she worked too, and so um, I was there one night, kind of having that if I were king conversation. Like, if it was me, I would do this, and if it was me, and if I had ultimate authority and decision making power, I would do this or I would do that. And somebody in the room said, "Well, why don't you?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I never thought of it like that." They said, you've been doing this for a long, long time. You've built all these programs here. You've done all this stuff. You have a world of knowledge and experience. Why don't you? Why don't you go do your own thing? And I thought about it, and then I thought about it a lot. And I thought, well, why? Well, why? And so the thought process kind of went to, when I got to the mission, it was really probably 95% inner city, um, guys that were kind of chronically homeless, and or coming out of prison or whatever. But through the 17 years of being there, and redoing all of the buildings and building this beautiful facility that now exists there, we started to get people from literally all over the country. Um, and so you'd have everything from, somebody who did 25 years to, a senator's son. It was just a wide gamut of different people. Um, and and then when I left, over 50% of the people coming to the mission, because we tracked a lot of data, were coming from outside Baltimore County, Harford County, Carroll County. And we would hear, like, we don't, no, not everybody wants to come to Baltimore City. And so kind of the thought was, kind of a helping up 2.0. I wanted to do something similar, smaller in scale, but similar in, philosophical scope and kind of programmatic scope, and take it out into a county. And originally, we just kind of threw a dart on a dartboard and said, we'll do Carroll County. And that didn't really work. And then we broadened the scope to other counties, and then of course COVID hit, and kind of put a downer on everything. And again, I talk about your full circle. Then the Salvation Army, they they started to close some of their facilities, and they closed the one on Patapsco Avenue. And I heard about it before they even closed, because somebody who was working there I knew through the mission, and he had reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm telling you, they're getting ready to close this place down." And I was like, "No, they're not closing. They've been there for 50 years. They're not going to close." He's like, "I'm telling you, they're closing." And so I reached out to their corporate office, and they said, "Yeah, we're closing it." gonna sell it, and so we had it under contract for a year, and as you know the story, it just didn't work out. Prior to that, we had St. Rita's and Dundalk kind of under contract with the Archdiocese and the community. Um, the NIMBY stuff, they didn't want it. They didn't want any part of it, and they caught wind of it and raised a stink, and so that went away. And so it's very discouraging. It was very discouraging. That those first couple of years were tough. And after we lost the contract on the Salvation Army building, we had to pivot. And so this idea of these micro communities within multiple communities is a good one, but it wasn't the origin story, right? It's what we ended up with. And now we have, five different facilities at this point, and with several more in the pipeline in different areas: Baltimore County, Baltimore City, Harford County, and of course, exploring where others might go. I don't hear you.
You're good. Keep going, Tom. I'm sorry.
Okay. But yeah, so that's how we got to be where we are today. I think I think one of your questions on here talks about, or did you want to ask the questions? I'm sorry, because I got a peek of the questions. So
sorry about that. Yeah, I mean, I guess describe for us what Summit does, because we're coming in from a place of sort of understanding the homeless shelter and the beds and the programs with the Helping Up mission.
Right.
But what is Summit? What is Summit doing?
Yeah, so again, it's really about when you strip it all away, right? Like, you get the Summit's, the mission statement is, Summit disrupts the cycle of addiction and homelessness by providing trauma-informed treatment, stable housing, and compassionate care that fosters hope and healing for individuals, for families, and neighborhoods impacted by substance use and co-occurring mental health disorders. But that's a mouthful. At the end of the day, it's radical kindness, right? It's treating people in a way they've never been treated before and doing it in a consistent manner. So many people that struggle with addiction come from, bad backgrounds, trauma, adverse childhood experiences, and all of that. And so to come to a place, and it's one of the things that I really, I learned at Helping Up, where you walk in and you're instantly greeted and treated and feel like this could be home. I feel good here. This feels right. Like it's almost like I was actually sent Joe we were texting back and forth on some stuff, and I said, we should get welcome mats that say, "Welcome home. Take your mask off and stay a while," right? Because addiction in so many ways is a manifestation of all the stuff that we struggle with, right? Our brokenness and our traumas, right? And we all wear these masks, and more especially when we're using, to hide all of that and show people what we want them to see and not who we really are, right?
Yeah.
So,
and it takes so much time too. It takes time to be able to get stabilized, and then it takes time to dig a little bit deeper than you have before, but then also to get to the point where you get past the mask enough to find out some new things about yourself. And we just can't do that alone. Human beings cannot spot self-deception on our own, right? We need a counselor and a group of people that are working on the same thing.
Right. But doing it for the right reasons as well. doing it because they really care and they're really, invested in trying to, and that's trying to help people. And that's why I believe, really, really believe that some of the best healing comes from peers, right? It's, there's a philosopher, his name is Henry Nouwen, and he wrote a book called The Wounded Healer Model. And I read it, and it's not really about addiction. It's really about leadership and practicing vulnerability within leadership. And it's okay to be vulnerable.
Mhm.
Um, but when, but it's so true in the world of addiction as well. So if you can come up beside somebody, like, so when I got to the mission, right, I thought nobody was as screwed up as I was, right? I thought there's nobody that's just torched their life like I have. There's nobody. And then I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not so bad. Like, there's guys that are like done way worse than me. But again, it doesn't matter if you strip all of that away. We're all just human beings underneath, and we're all just human beings, yearning for connection and value, right? To be part of something bigger than ourselves. And so, like, one of the things, and I know I'm jumping around here, like, one of the things I saw at the mission that I thought was fascinating was, as we did grow and we started to get people that would come from affluent upbringings, we would get somebody that they may have sent their kid to, I won't name program names, but high end programs that cost thousands of dollars a day, and they're like, we've done this twice, whatever, we're done. You're going to the mission, like. But then when they walk in the mission, they're like, wow, this place is as nice as those places. Like, it's beautiful, and you can stay here for a year for free. Like, wow. Um, but I would see friendships develop because, again, when you strip away all the bullshit, right? And now you've just got people. It doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter if you're a guy that grew up in the projects, or you're a guy that grew up in Montgomery County. It's like, and I would see these friendships develop that here's two guys that, outside of being here trying to deal with their addiction issue, never would have crossed paths, right? Just no way in the world would have crossed paths. And now they're becoming best friends, like authentic friends, right? And they stay friends. And you see it, on social media, whatever, that these guys continue to try to help each other. And that's just a beautiful thing, really. I know you get that. It's just a really beautiful thing to see people stay invested in other people, because one of the things about addiction is, and the healing process is, it's not linear, right? It just isn't. The there are, I think the scientists or whoever like to see it that way, like 3.7 to 3.5 to 3.3 to 3.1 3.5. It's like, but it doesn't work that way. And I will say that ASAM 3.1 level of care, which is what Summit does, is a really, really great thing. And it was a missing component in the cog. So what's so broken, and has been so broken in the treatment realm for so long, is, here's how it works, right? I have a problem, and I'm out there, and I need detox. So I got to find a place that'll do that. So I go there, but the insurance says, okay, we're done. 5 days, you're done. Now I got to go somewhere else. So then they come in and say, time for you to go to your next place, and here are some spots that we recommend. And you're like, oh yeah, I was just starting to get a little bit comfortable, but okay. And then whoosh, now you're going to another place. So then you go there for 28 days, because that's the model, right? That's what somebody came up with, this 28-day model. And so you go to another place, and now you're like, okay, it's stopping and starting, and it's not, now I've got to get comfortable here. How do I deal with this environment, and what's the culture like? And then 28 days later, they come to you and say, insurance is up, time for you to go. And in the old days, that's it, right? There's
Yeah.
really nothing beyond that. The next step is sober living, or halfway houses, whichever vernacular.
If you even took that route, and a lot of
Right,
people would say, well, I got treatment, and your family would go, oh, you're healed now, you're good to go, get back to work.
right. And we both know 30 days, you're just coming out of the fog, man. You're just starting to come
I
out of.
think it took me about 2 years to come out of the
Right,
fog.
right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
I mean, yeah, physically, it takes at least 30 days just to really clear the head, right?
yeah,
So now you're saying, right, now you're going back home, and so many people just would go back home or go back to wherever and end up using again and again and again, and it just becomes this cyclical pattern.
yeah,
Uh, and so, I mean, that was one of the beautiful things about helping up was you go in there, you can stay for years, right? Like as long as you're an active member of the community and you're doing something and you're growing, um, you know, there's opportunities to do all kinds of things, become staff member or whatever. But to get to a place where it becomes home, really becomes home. It was so neat to hear a guy say, "Yeah, I went home I went to visit my wife for the weekend and then came home." Like home was the mission, is
yeah,
get to a place where they understand I'm not ready to go home yet, and that's where you're reaching people when they know I'm not really ready to go home and try to be a parent or try to be a husband yet. Um, I have to work on myself some more first before I'm ready to do that. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, so this ASAM 3.1, which enables guys to stay up to 9 months, is a significant, it's a nice significant amount of time. And I think between that and then trying to um, refer them to our own network of recovery houses so they can stay engaged um, with the community and stay within a continuum, right? So it's that continuum that you go like this, up and down, and if you can have it be steady, then people can get into that comfort zone where they'll be comfortable enough to remove the mask because they're not going to walk in the door and take the mask off. If anything, they're going to put more on in the beginning until they get to a place where they feel like I'm safe. These are real people who are really genuinely here to try to help me. And in order for me to allow them to help me, I've got to demask. Um, so
So what do you feel like are some of the treatments, the innovative treatments or approaches that Summit is taking, that are different or that are most beneficial for the guys in the program?
so comprehensiveness, right? So one of the things, like, and again, I'll refer back to the mission a lot. Like we were finding was, we didn't have anything, and I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have any classical training in addiction or recovery, and so we would send guys out for therapy. We would send guys out for medical. We'd send them out, and sometimes they would come back, sometimes they wouldn't. That's dangerous in and of itself, especially in the early days, right? Send a guy across town to do something, give him a bus pass, and you know he runs into Jimmy and says, "Hey, But then there's also just the essence of not knowing really what's going on with his life because HIPAA and all that. So they're not gonna, the doctors aren't gonna call you up and say, "Hey, your guy came today and this is what's going on with him." And so we were recognizing that, hey, this doesn't work. Like if we're gonna help people, we got to know people. And then we're like, wait a minute, we got 500. We got to the place we have 500. We have captured audience. Let's make them come to us. Let's build this thing out and build space for partners to become co-located on site, and so that we build this comprehensive integrated model where it's all one, it's all under one roof. We're not sending guys out for this, we're not sending guys out for that. Everything gets done there, almost everything. Of course, surgeries and stuff like that, but almost everything can happen within the construct of the facility. And then you really start to then you're cooking with gas, right? But then even that, right, you still have multiple partners from different organizations working together, and as much work and effort you put into it, there's still those, 42 CFRs and HIPAA regulations that make it difficult to make it really streamlined and really wholly integrated. And so that, again, that was part of the thing with Summit was, Summit Community Foundation is the nonprofit piece that provides housing and transportation and life enrichment activities and all of that good stuff, social determinants of health, and then Summit Community Health that provides the clinical aspect of the programming, the therapists and um, medication assisted treatment and such. And then Health Alliance, who's our integrated partner who provides primary care and medication assisted treatment management, labs, and behavioral health. So all of it, right, encompassed in one thing, as opposed to sending guys to different places. It can still kind of happen like in a microcosm, kind of like the mission, right? Um, so yeah, so that's the hit.
Yeah, absolutely. And even and even doing some life enrichment.
Oh,
And Summit has already gone bowling, has gone to the Orioles game, has done hiking and camping, has done Nature Works, which is like a meditative nature program.
yep.
Is going on a fishing trip coming up here on June 22nd, which will actually be after this comes out. So yeah, I mean, and I think that's a very important part of the gratitude aspect as well, right? For guys to have something to look forward to, in their life and in their recovery, that they're having fun too.
It's 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 monumental, man. It's so like when I got to the mission, I, I don't remember a day, without using, right? So everything was connected to using. So then you're saying to me, you're going to live your life now and have fun. Like, so then it just became like, I can't have fun without using. Like if I'm going to go this, I'm going to get high. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to eat some mushrooms. I'm going to do this. Everything was connected to a drug, right? And now you're saying I'm going to go back to living my life like a kid, right? Like, um, but it's very possible. And it's interesting to watch guys, especially like artists, because they think they need it in order to practice their art, and all of a sudden they find out they don't. They find out they're better guitarists or better bassists or better drummers when they're not totally fucked up.
Yep.
So
And that they like remembering what they did and where they went. They like how fast they can learn new stuff
right,
and not have to sell their guitar, which is
right, right, and
yeah,
it's really cool to you know to to bring experiences to guys who've never done certain things. Like, we would take guys, hiking, or take guys to Camp Obana, or take guys, to do equine therapy. And some guys have never been out of the city. It's like they're like, whoa, what's this? It's like, so these are really, really cool experiences for some people to have.
yeah. It's
Uh,
hard to describe how special they really are. And you've kind of taken us to, talking about early on where there wasn't very many treatment centers of any kind back when you came into to your recovery experience. And then you talked about the evolution with the Helping Up mission, and now there's 3.1 availability that's in the marketplace. What do you kind of see as the future for treatment? Where do you see things going?
yeah, I hope that, one of the things that discourages me is that there are a lot of opportunities now. So I think that is good in a sense, but there are a lot of providers that are still practicing what what I call the Florida model, right? Where, they open up a clinic of some kind, a center, and get that accredited as an outpatient center. And then they lease or buy houses that aren't really part of it, but they need the captive audience. So you have so many people who struggle with addiction, struggle with homelessness as well, right? So they don't have a place to live. And um, and so, but there's no licensure or accreditation around that housing. And so it's wherever you end up. And there are a couple of, there are a few providers out there that really do try to do it well and do it right. But there are a lot of them that are just people trying to, unfortunately, the treatment industry has become somewhat monetized and commoditized, and that's one of the things that drove me to start Summit, because I was seeing that. I was seeing people starting to take advantage of this kind of flaw in the system where they could do that. And so when I got started and we couldn't land the building, I had a couple people come to me and say, "Hey, just get a clinic and yeah, do this." I'm like, "No, I'm not doing that, man." I'm like, "That's not, because it doesn't. You're not really helping people, because they're living in a house that probably isn't very healthy, and then they take them in a van and bring them over to a clinic and give them therapy for 6 hours a day so they can bill on them, and then shuffle them back to the house at night and back and forth and back and forth. And just, it's just, I've never actually been part of something like that, but I know lots of guys that have, and it just doesn't sound very appealing, and it doesn't seem to have very good outcomes.
Yeah, me neither. But it does seem like that's sort of more prevalent than not,
Right.
at least throughout the Baltimore City and the Central Maryland area.
Yeah. So my hope, to your question, is my hope is that it's being recognized enough, kind of at the at the state level, that they'll start to create some legislation, which is what Florida did around this, because it's essentially patient brokering, and try to cut back on some of the providers, make it more difficult to be a provider, be required to show outcomes, and be required to, all of your facilities, whatever facilities you're using, are wide open and seen and licensed and accredited. And that's what I like about the 3.1 model, is there's nothing hidden there. It's all under the auspices of CARF accreditation, and Maryland licensing. And so um, what you're getting.
Yeah, and I think whatever happens in the future too with recovery housing, in all its forms, I think really it'll stay at its strongest when it's communal, when it's many people working with the same cause, living together. I think that is just a more natural way to live, and people seem to do their best, especially because, like, part of your story was being able to be of service to others by providing value to the group. You felt at your best, and I think that's not a mystery. That's just natural, right? For us to be able to harness that, and
Yeah,
for guys to be able to get better in that way.
yeah. I've always given my sister Lisa credit for that. Like, after, a couple years into my journey, she said, don't, and I don't remember exact conversation words, but basically it was like, don't get wrapped up in all that anonymity bullshit. Share your story to help others. So don't use your story to because your story might inspire somebody else. And I can't even tell you how many times. And so I guess, what happened ultimately at the mission was that the board, a few years in, decided they would put my before picture, my book, my central booking picture, and my after picture right up, on the main wall of the chapel, so everybody could see. And that was extremely cathartic for me, because there's no more no more mass. Like, you're out there, man. Your shit's way out there for everybody to walk through and see. And it helped me enormously to say, that doesn't matter. My past doesn't define me, right? um it's part of what made me the person I am today, but it isn't self-defining. I'm defined by what I'm going to do with that past into my future, right? And so, yeah, I mean, throwing it up on the wall wasn't my idea. It never would have been my idea, but it was a really beneficial thing for me, and I think beneficial for other people. Because, one of the things that I do is, when I look at other providers, is I look at their leadership, and if I don't see people with lived experience, and they're at the top of the chain, I can't help but question their motives, and that may or may not be right. Um, but it's kind of like, this business is a tough business. It's hard. There's a lot of death, and failure and heartache, and there's not, it's not something to jump into lightly. Um, and look, to your point, it's communal. The best way it works is communal, and the best way it works is with peers, helping others. There's a need for some business acumen, obviously, and there's a need for some clinical therapeutic, and more people are coming through, their process, and going back to school, and getting degrees and stuff, and that's, I think, very powerful. But there are there are there are plenty of good clinicians, who don't have lived experience. But these are people that are kind of born with that massive empathetic streak in them, that they just naturally want to help other people, and there's, not everybody is like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a special person that it takes to really care on that deep of a level.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Because the people who struggle with addiction they're tough nuts to crack. It's there's a lot going on there. And um yeah, and sometimes it's hidden away, and that's, some of the things that I'm fascinated by, is some of the research going on with, pharmacological, tools to try to break down the walls, to, because there are things that happen, and I'm not a doctor, and I don't understand it completely, but the essence of, something happens to a kid, and the kid's mind at that point does something to shut it off, to protect himself, and sometimes that stays shut off, right? And so, as they get older in life, and they're struggling with addiction, and sometimes it's like, everything seems to be going perfectly fine for the person, and they use it. People can't understand that, and it is baffling, cunning, baffling. But sometimes what that is that hidden trauma that they don't even know about. And in order for them to access that, sometimes it involves kind of disassociating from the prefrontal cortex, and allowing that monster to kind of come out. But you got to be ready to deal with it when it comes out. So it's beyond me and my comprehension, but I kind of get it. I kind of understand it. Um, because it is frustrating um, to see people who have so much potential. You can see it in them, and they can't see it in themselves, or they don't want to, or whatever it is, or they just keep going back to it. And I know, I shared with you recently, as a guy that, was just an all-star in so many ways in his life, and so much capability, and he took his own life last week. And it's sad, because it seems to me that, he was fearful that he was going to end up being thrown in prison, because he was having a hard time following the court ordered rigors of his um, drug treatment court. And it's like,
Mm.
this should there should be no it's just, there should be no punitive action within this context of treatment, right? I mean, it just doesn't. I mean, it's one thing if you hurt somebody, you did something wrong, and you need to be punished for it. But it's just to me that's insane. It's just really really sad and
It's
unfortunate.
tragic. Yeah, it's tragic, especially because there's always a way through.
Yeah,
And and yeah, I think you're right. That actually, speaking of the future, that would be nice to think about a future where those outcomes are clinician led, as opposed to
right,
just a judge or a court system having to make those decisions.
right, right. I think we're getting there. I do. I mean, I think we've come a long, long way. I mean, it takes time, and you look back 20 years ago, we used to, call people morons and retards and things like that were okay to say. And now, if you said that in today's world, people would, you'd be ostracized, rightly so. It's like it's a mental illness. It's not, and so we're learning. I feel like it's been a little bit of a long uptake on the addiction piece, but um, and I'm not sure why it ever really got carved out of mental health, and I think they've been trying to carve it back in for the last 10 years or so, but it's all part and parcel. It's all part of the human brain. It's all brain activity. So um,
And thankfully, too, the settlements, the pharmaceutical settlements, are coming down the pike. So there'll be resources too to carry us. Um, so I'm curious of what you see for Summit in the next few years, at least. Where do you see Summit going as far as location wise, and sort of what's the overall vision?
yeah, so I think the main piece, because we talked about it already, is having the full continuum of care. So we're trying to find a location to do a 3.5 level of care, so we can start people off in the early onset of kind of the early withdrawal and that first part, and then instead of them going from there to a new provider, they stay within the same provider Summit. So 3.5 to 3.1 to 2.5, which would be aftercare, so that somebody can stay as a Summit participant in some fashion for multiple years even. And because really, somebody like me, and I think you said it for yourself too, it takes that kind of time when you've put 20 years in to practicing a certain art. You don't stop at 28 days. It's like stopping an ocean liner. It's like you push stop, but it's going to keep going for a while, and before it actually comes to a full stop, it's going to take a while. um, and if there's a lot of drama or changes within that time, it just makes it all that much harder. But if you can stay within within the culture where you're comfortable and you know what to expect, and um, I just think that makes all the difference in the world. So
So
yeah,
is there? So
so
we usually close with this too. Is there any advice that was great advice as well? But is there any advice that you would like to give to anybody who's maybe thinking about getting into treatment?
don't be afraid to ask. Your parents love you. Your family loves you. I know shame. I think shame has killed as many people as the drug or the alcohol has, because we get into this place where I can tell you that when I was living on the streets, and I was dying day by day. I was dying. And I have a family that loved me, and if I had just reached out to them, they'd have been in front of my bando in 15 minutes or less, or they might have said, well, let's meet somewhere where it's not as dangerous. But you know what I'm saying. And I've told this story, and you probably heard it. I used to go to the phone. I would get to this place where I'm like, I can't do this anymore, and I'd be crying, and I'd go to the payphone, pick the phone up, put it down, pick it up, put it down, and I was just so overcome with shame because of who I had become, that I couldn't pick up the phone and just say help. help me, please help me. Um, and I think there's a lot of people out there who still aren't asking for help. And so ask for help. That's my recommendation. Ask somebody for help. And if you happen to know somebody that has been through it before, ask them, because they're going to give you the best advice. I do it all the time. I have people reaching out to me, and I know you do too, all the time. And and I tell them, because they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry to bother you." I'm like, the day that this becomes a bother is the day I need to go back to selling stereos or something. Like, this is what I do.
Back to washing cars.
This is my life. And so don't ever feel bad about calling me and asking me for help.
Ask for help. I love that. All right. Well, I'm gonna give one more quote that I found the other day that I really liked, to leave us with some additional food for thought, and then I'll obviously have all of your contact information that you want to share in the show notes here, links to Summit Maryland, and anything else that you want to share with people. We'll have it down there. This is actually an Epicurus quote that I really liked, and it says, "Do not spoil what you have by desiring what you have not. Remember that what you now have was once among the things that you only hoped for." And with that, we'll close. Tom, it was a pleasure having you on. I know we could talk for another 2 hours without stopping, but I appreciate you being on here. All of the opinions expressed in this episode today were obviously just those of our own. Yep. And if you are looking for treatment and for help, certainly Summit is, in my opinion, one of the best, if not the best, program that is out there for all the right reasons, and they are here to help. So thank you, Tom, for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
We'll talk again soon.
Yep.